Good morning, Edwardsville High School and guests. Today is Thursday, somewhere in April, first Thursday in April, and we are going to be talking about the civil rights movement in America today, which is why I busted out the 12-string guitar. I'm going to sing a little bit for you. So yesterday, you and or your parents should have received an email detailing the plan once again. I'm pleased to see that since I sent that email, most of you have actually watched a video or two. Your grades are updated. We do have some grades from before we left the building. And some of you missed the last day or two, and so you didn't turn those few grades in. Consequently, you don't have any grades. And I appreciate those of you who have fixed that problem and have sent me things over email. Let me remind you that if you are sending an assignment, send it to kbaker@ecusd7.org, and you will see your grades updated either Monday or Wednesday of next week. Those are the days I can get into the building and update grades. If you find that you need grades, then you need to start doing some of the assignments I give on these videos. There's only been one so far, and that has been To What Degree is the Government an Agency of Human Welfare? And if you've been in my class for any given amount of time, you have heard us talk about that. There will be a variety. So every day I'm going to provide certain assignments to give you an opportunity to improve your grade. The more you do, the better your grade will be buffered against potential problems in the future, and the more you can build up what has been a problem in the past, and remediate the fact that some of you didn't turn some stuff in. In fact, there's some of you who've turned literally nothing in, which is, so if that's not you, you're doing okay. So today we're talking about the civil rights movement in America, and we're into fourth quarter content, and we're going to get to the end of the semester in this month. Maybe, likely, yeah, likely. And then we'll be reviewing for, I don't know what the end of the semester is going to look like, but we'll be reviewing for it. I don't know if there will be a summative assessment of some kind or not. We will know more on by the 14th. On the 14th, things change, and I don't know what they're changing to. I mean, there will still be remote learning. There just may be different instructions concerning our ability to provide some form of assessment and grading. So the future is yet to be written. So, but in the meantime, to help yourself, there will be an assignment at the end of this video. So today we're talking about the civil rights movement in America. And one of the challenges we see during the 1950s is that America has, an entire past based on racism, on 187 years-ish of slavery, on 99 years of Jim Crow segregation, at least up until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the challenges are pervasive in that America had, in the 1950s, an institutionalized system of segregation that operated in a racist manner in the United States. Segregation had been, of course, created through Plessy v. Ferguson, and today we'll see that come to an end. But before that, I would like to sing you a song. Alec, this is for you. This is Pete Seeger's Little Boxes. And one of the points of this song is that America had this idea of what it was to be normal. This is a post-war environment. We've created new markets. Our mercantilism is chugging along nicely. And the economy is fairly solid. We are taxing at a fairly high rate, which is one of the secrets to us paying off the debt. And of course, it's a graduated income tax. For those of you who don't understand graduated income tax, I've done my best. I really have. That's the thing you'll need to figure out in the future, because just because you're in a 57% tax bracket doesn't mean you pay 57% of your income in taxes. That's not how the world works. So we were taxing at a fairly high rate in the 1950s, and the economy was doing great, and the government was trying to solve the world's problems because there was a Cold War. We're pretty sure we're going to die in a nuclear holocaust, fireballs of doom raining down on us from the Soviet Union. And in the meantime, American culture wants some form of stability. When you let go of what you cannot control, you grip more tightly that which you can control. And there's a whole lot of metaphors there. But nevertheless, Americans decided that there were certain cultural norms that they insisted on. It was, at least for the majority of Americans, it was great to be Protestant, it was great to be white, it was great to not be communist, to support democracy and the free market and capitalism. And if you didn't like those things, you were subject to the House Un-American Activities Committee, the Truman institutions that were going to investigate you and possibly even throw you in jail for your ideas that did not match what was considered acceptable. And if it wasn't considered acceptable, America rejected it. And so we're going to see, hopefully tomorrow, some writings by James Baldwin in which he suggests that growing up black in America was really strange because you went to the movies and you fell in love with Joan Crawford and there was no one black who was a hero, and yet somehow your identity is at war with what you see in the culture around you. So Pete Seeger wrote this song called Little Boxes, suggesting that America had an idea of what was right and attempted to pursue it culturally. Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes, little boxes, little boxes, all the same. There's a green one and a pink one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the people in the houses all went to university and they all got put in boxes and little boxes all the same. There are doctors and there's lawyers and business executives and they all get put in boxes and they all come out just the same. And of course, his suggestion is that American culture makes things that reflect the American culture. And those are white Anglo-Saxon Protestant norms that are found as the acceptable model. And if that's not the model, it's not acceptable. Other cultures are rejected, other ethnicities are rejected, and that's simply the reality of that time period. So let's open up edmodo.com, shall we? If you would like to follow along, you should pause the video, go to edmodo.com, go to the folder called The Civil Rights Movement in America. You may notice I'm wearing my St. Louis Cardinals shirt today because this will be the first April since 1883 that there's no professional baseball in America. Let that sink in for a minute. The magnitude of what we are going through right now may not be understood. I mean, the scale and scope of this event, of this social isolation virus event, yes, we're better equipped to handle it than the Spanish flu in 1918, so we're probably not going to see as many deaths, I hope. And we're taking action better than they did it, better than they could have in 1918. They couldn't even get information to people quickly. It was was transmitted as fast as newspapers and radio, which was a greater delay than our pervasive media environment. So no baseball since 1883. That's one for the history books. From your perspective, you've had your events canceled. I am supposed to be attending Winter Guard International Championships today and this weekend, and now I won't. None of us will. There isn't one. In fact, even the drum corps season has been canceled. So I will probably not be making these videos over the summer. Hopefully I'm teaching summer school. But we don't know what the future holds. This thing's a big deal. So let's go to the civil rights movement in America and take a look at slide 2. You are aware that Jim Crow laws are the series of rules that created separation between black and white Americans. Even St. Louis, well, St. Louis is kind of famous for their own version of these segregation laws. Edwardsville High School was segregated for a long period of time. There was a white school and a black school. And St. Louis is famous for what's known as redlining, for creating neighborhoods where black families could buy houses and neighborhoods where white families could buy houses. And I bet you can guess which ones were the better neighborhoods. There were paragraphs placed into deeds saying that certain properties could not be occupied by black families. That some churches couldn't be occupied by black people. These racist, institutionalized systems were put in place in order to maintain the separation and segregation of races in America. One of the purposes is to keep minorities from voting in a way that would affect the outcome of elections. If all the minority people are pushed into a certain ward or gerrymandered district, then their impact would be less noticeable on the election. Gerrymandering, of course, is still in use today. You can find many examples of it. You have but to Google it to find those examples. In 1954, Brown versus Board of Education is the court case in which the concept of separate but equal is ruled unconstitutional. Linda Brown was the person who brought this suit, and our famous Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall served as the lawyer in the case. And the Supreme Court said that while separate but equal as an idea is theoretically possible, it is never put into practice. It was never put into practice in a way that was actually equal. The white school always got more than the black school. The white waiting room was always better than the black waiting room. The white train car was always the white train car was better than the black train car. And it was simply a reality in America. And part of the purpose of the system. So in 1957, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a variety of other African-American clergy are going to organize the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I would like to point out that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference is a huge deal. They are one of the first major organizations, and I stress the word organizations. Individuals, of course, pushed for civil rights for a long time. We saw that in the suffrage movement, organized groups of women who pushed for voting rights for women, and I would consider those to be civil rights organizations. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, however, is one of the first which attempts to end segregation. And they do so through the support of nonviolent opposition. And the word for that is satyagraha. Gandhi came up with the idea of satyagraha, and it would be appropriate if you learned the word satyagraha. That word is kind of embedded within all of our curriculum. And at this point, it would be appropriate for you to be able to say satyagraha, to know it means nonviolent opposition. It's one of our vocabulary words of the day, and it means not fighting back during a protest. The purpose is to create an exposed understanding that a power structure will use violence to maintain control. And once the population sees that the degree to which the government will go to maintain control, the population will vote against them. The government will lose support. At least that's the idea. And it did happen in India, and it did happen ultimately in South Africa at the end of apartheid. And it does happen in the United States incrementally over time through a series of events. Well, we're seeing a lot of that rolled back in the last 3 years. Some provisions of the Civil Rights Act have since been eliminated, which you get to vote about. Hopefully, you'll vote. In Montgomery, Alabama, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference will stage a bus boycott, I'm not going certainly in these lessons, and usually never in the classroom. I don't want to cover the middle school curriculum again. You are familiar with Rosa Parks. You know the role she played. But the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott is where Dr. King is propelled to national prominence. But change is slow. Some of us are Bolsheviks and some of us are Mensheviks. Some of us want change immediately, and others simply want to write a strongly worded letter and create incremental change. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council was created by those who want a little bit more change, a little bit faster. Those people tend to be younger. They're the second wave of emerging civil rights leaders in America. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council is also nonviolent, but I will say less nonviolent. From the leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council, we eventually see the emergence of the Black Panthers, who are, I would argue, maybe less nonviolent still. Civil rights group, we're on slide 8. Civil rights groups, in their pursuit of satyagraha, nonviolent opposition, often stage sit-ins, bus boycotts, a variety of boycotts, bus rides, the Freedom Riders, if you've heard of them. We'll talk about them a bit later. And they would often endure hardship. They would endure bad treatment by others in a way that was public, so that they could highlight the inequalities in America. They could highlight the poor treatment of minorities. Here in this image, we see a Jackson, Mississippi lunch counter at a store known as Woolworth's. Woolworth's was a chain store. It was a department store that had a lunch counter in it. Some stores were well known in the past and are now gone. I don't know how many of you may remember, or your parents would remember, Montgomery Ward. I used to work at one once, and there aren't any around anymore. But at this Woolworth's, you see white Southerners in Jackson, Mississippi, pouring drinks over the heads of the minorities and their allies at this lunch counter, because Woolworth's had a policy that minorities could not sit at the lunch counter. So this form of protest, of course, draws media attention, and it highlights in the North how bad it is in the South. And you may remember that Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed the brutality of slavery to the North, who claimed not to be aware of it at one point. And so the tide, just like the tide turns in public opinion for Lincoln's support and the support of the Republican Party in the 1850s, we see that these protests, these satyagraha nonviolent protests, in the 1950s are going to change opinion and move some people toward the political party, and it's in flux in the 1950s as to which political party supports what. It solidifies more in the 1960s, but we've already talked about that. The process we talked about that started in 1924 will conclude in 1960. So the Freedom Riders attempt to get on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, travel to Jackson, Mississippi, then travel to New Orleans to simply highlight inequalities in the South. Their goal was awareness. That was all they wanted to do. But they were stopped outside Jackson, Mississippi by the state police, who then told them to get off the bus, and they didn't want to get off the bus. They thought they were going to be killed in a field outside Jackson, Mississippi. And so the dogs were sent in, and they didn't get off the bus. And then the bus was set on fire, and they had to get off the bus. And so they simply stood in a field and watched their bus burn, which, of course, is, I think, probably serves their purpose better than simply riding in peace. It did demonstrate the inequalities in the South. Now, the next slide talks about an event at Ole Miss. I would like to point out my cousin went to Ole Miss. The Ole Miss in this slide and in the 1950s is not the Ole Miss we see today. Ole Miss is a wonderful institution. Many Edwardsville High School students go to Ole Miss and find it to be a welcoming, accepting environment for everybody. But in the 1950s, the American South had a pervasive pattern of racism and a refusal to end segregation. So James Meredith is one of the test cases for integration on American college campuses. He was denied admission to the all-white university, of course, because he was black, and the governor of Mississippi personally blocked James Meredith's admission to campus. This was a flashpoint for opinion in the South. Southern African Americans protested this. The protests, of course, were met with opposition. Rioting ensues from a variety of people. And after several days of that, President Kennedy in 1960 will send in troops to restore order and escort James Meredith to class. So I want to point out that the civil rights movement in America largely starts from a religious perspective with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It then changes a bit, it transforms because young people want change faster, less incrementally, and then the federal government steps in. So there are waves of the civil rights movement that happen over time. So maybe I'll back up just a bit. First, judicial. In my brain wants to say Plessy v. Ferguson, in Brown versus Board of Education. So Brown versus Board of Education was judicial, and then we see religious movements get involved, and then an age-based movement, and then finally the federal government executive branch steps in and takes action. So I will admit it does go in phases. The largest gains probably came in Birmingham, Alabama, in a series of boycotts in which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is put in jail. And during that time, he writes Letters from Birmingham Jail. I read it in college, and I was sort of forced to read it in college. And afterwards, I can't believe that I didn't choose to do so. If you are a student of history, at some point you need to read Letters from Birmingham Jail. And what happened in Birmingham is a full expression of satyagraha, of nonviolent protest, in which, as you see in slide 12, protesters simply walked down the street, and the police and the fire department were called out through the orders of the police commissioner, Eugene Bull Connor. The formatting online isn't perfect, and the word Connor is underneath the slide. But Eugene Bull Connor orders the police to beat up the protesters with police batons, to let the dogs bite the protesters, police dogs bite the protesters, and tells the fire department to turn water cannons on the protesters. I don't know if you've ever been hit by a water cannon, but it will roll you down the street. Next time you see me, you'll have to ask me about my experience with a water cannon. I'm not putting it online, just so you know. So when the televisions in the American North finally broadcast the images from Birmingham, Alabama, and the treatment of Southern African American protesters, the public opinion in America began to turn against segregation. And so this is the moment, the Uncle Tom's Cabin moment, when the North changes their opinion about a certain issue and begins to vote differently. Television brought the violence into middle-class American homes, and the Attorney General of the United States finally stepped in and negotiated a desegregation arrangement for the schools, the buses, the trains, the waiting rooms, the water fountains in Birmingham, Alabama. So in the election of 1960, John F. Kennedy wanted to help Dr. King stay out of jail, and he was instrumental in getting Dr. King released from jail, and it may have contributed to Kennedy's small margin of victory over Richard Nixon. So I'm just about at the end here today, and I want to point out that the civil rights movement was not without loss. It was not without pain and suffering, and people who actually had to endure quite a bit in America. We owe much to the people in the past who fought for rights for everybody. But, you know, we've got a variety of perspectives. That's one of the themes in our class. So I want to point out that there was a huge portion of our country that resisted segregation, who acted in a racist manner, and that therein lies one of the challenges of us understanding history today. I mean, why study history if we can't see what's happening around us? I told you for a while what was going to happen in America, and lo and behold, here we are, because I know where certain choices lead, because history tells us. So we know in our past that there was a variety of belief systems that maintained minorities in an unequal status. So you may have seen on the news that there is a minority group who has been reinforced in an unequal status recently. I don't want to give it away in case you look it up. But there, in our world around us today, we find, when I say our world around us, I mean the United States. In the United States, not all interest groups accept universal equality in the United States. The Supreme Court just heard a case about whether or not women can get drafted. So I'd like you to look that up. So email me at kbaker@ecusd7.org. What did the Supreme Court say? What are the arguments about the equality of women? And I mean, are all people equal? And to what degree are they equal? Are they literally equal in every manner? The Supreme Court has an opinion on it. I would like this is pretty easy. Just Google something, send me the answer. What is the Supreme Court's opinion? What are the arguments about women getting drafted? I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.